Before the whites started implementing the schools for the Native Americans, the Native American children were educated at home by their families. The parents and grandparents taught the kids through daily happenings, ceremonies, and storytelling. The purpose of the assimilation schools by the whites were to break away the Native American children from their cultural roots and convert them from their traditional ways to ways instituted by the U.S. government. The idea of this was to make them more civilized and warp them into the melting pot we are starting to see in America. We started to see a lot of the assimilation schools in the mid to late 1800s. One of the first open schools was in 1879 in a city in Pennsylvania. This was founded by Captain Richard Henry Pratt. Pratt strongly pushed for the assimilation through education. Himself, along with many others, believed that the Native Americans were inferior to the whites. Not only were they taken from their families and thrown into a completely different educational setting, their appearance would soon change too. When arriving at the school, by dressing the Native American children differently, they thought that alone could be enough of a start to civilize them. They would be dressed daily based on the idea of a Victorian lifestyle. In the classroom slide, you see this included white gowns for the girls with their hair braided and a white bow intact. The young boys would be expected to be dressed in a suit uniform. The following slide of the 4 Native American children shows a basic daily look they would wear if they were back home on the reservation. Now granted, this is just an example of a daily routine done at one of the schools, but as you can see, it's kind of extenuous, especially for young children. For example, not many young children today I know can say they get up at 5:45 a.m. for school. After that, 5:55 to 6:10 in the morning, setting up exercise and drill. Then, from 6:12 to 6:45, more recreation, 6:45 eating breakfast, and on and on. It's a very strict schedule, both for academic settings and out of it. With such high numbers of Native American children to educate, the government decided to make 2 different types of schools, the reservation boarding school along with day schools. The reservation boarding schools helped save the government money because there was lower transportation costs because the reservation schools were closer to the actual reservations themselves. Although the reservation boarding schools were closer to the reservations themselves, family time was still limited. There were certain days and times that family was allowed to visit, but for the most part, the children did not get to see their family, for they would be going to school normally 8 to 9 months of the year. There were certain cases even where they would get letters home saying they wouldn't be home for the holidays. While some might think they are all negative, there actually are some positive experiences that kids found on the reservation schools. For example, some of the boys played baseball, ran foot races, played pegs and marbles, lots of different kind of games just to keep them entertained. There's also some other sports they might play. And along with that, with how much time they spent away from their families at the schools, they made friendships that they wouldn't have otherwise. Something I found really interesting online in the same interview with Carolyn Marr, a young boy, Lumi, said that on the reservation there was no electricity or running water. When I came to boarding school, they had these things, showers and clean clothes, and they ate decent food. Some might wonder why he didn't get this at the reservation. And he said, "My mom died when I was 13 months old. I stayed with my grandmother who wasn't well. My main criticism of the boarding school," he went on to say, like I'll tell you later, "was that they didn't let you do your own thinking. You marched everywhere, you were governed by the bell and whatever, but at the same time, it gave me a bed, shower, clean clothes, and food." There were different negative aspects to the assimilation schools for the Native Americans, one being the overcrowded conditions, which led to extremely high chances for a sickness to spread once one child gained it. And along with that, minimal health care caused serious outbreaks of alarming diseases such as measles, influenza, and tuberculosis. Another negative aspect was homesickness. Quoted from an entry by Helma Ward Maka in an interview with Caroline Marr, "2 of our girls ran away, but they got caught. They tied their legs up, tied their hands behind their backs, put them in the middle of the hallway so that if they fell asleep or something, the matron would hear them and she'd go out there and whip them and make them stand up again." In another interview with a young boy, he said that it simply just doesn't give you the right to think on your own. And I can see how this can be a negative aspect for somebody his age. Because to me, if I compare the example of the daily routine we looked at earlier, it almost compares to what nowadays we think of as committing to go to something like the Marines, which you have to keep in mind that you have to be 18, and that's a huge commitment for somebody to make. While bringing it back, these kids have these daily schedules and are forced to do these things at such a young age. And I can see that he doesn't think you get the right to think on your own because you have to do this, this, this. You're going from one thing to the next. You really don't have time to just be yourself and just think and do your own thing. My goal was to help you understand what Native American children's education was like before the assimilation schools, the purpose the whites thought they had in implementing the assimilation schools, the start of the boarding schools, the daily routine, a couple facts, and the positive and negative effects the children found on themselves from the schools.